November 6, 2006. Istanbul Liberford College is about to start on a windy day. With its large campus and numerous facilities, it's definitely not your typical high school. Beyond that, the school operates under its own set of unique rules and freedoms. Due to its autonomous status, even some activities that would be illegal elsewhere are perfectly fine within the campus boundaries. We do not yet know why or how the school was founded. But maybe a new student might shed some light. And now, let's go to the dorm. Even after 2.5 months, Gökhan still hasn't quite settled into his classes or the new scene, and today, he's feeling particularly on edge. This time, he has a more specific reason. Frustrated after searching for his lost student card in his dorm room, he decides to get some fresh air. During this time, he notices poker tables arranged on the terrace of the campus mall. Yes, you read that right. While gambling is generally illegal in Turkey, it's allowed at this school. Gökhan closes the window, grabs his backpack, and heads to the door. However, just as he's about to swing it open, he suddenly stops, makes a detour to his desk, retrieves 500 lira from the steel safe he cracked open by bending over, and then bolts out of his room. Afterward, he and his classmate Ilker assist in preparing the school breakfast menus in the cafeteria. Yes, some students here can secure small part-time jobs at the school. After working together for a while, Ilker breaks the silence. He mentions that he spoke with an acquaintance who works as a caregiver in households last night, but she turned down the offer. But Gökhan refuses, saying that he wants to talk to the caregiver directly. Wanting to find a better and more reliable caregiver for his bedridden aunt, he tells Ilker that he wants to talk to the caregiver directly. But neither Gökhan's persistence nor his complaints about the current caregiver change Ilker's opinion. And it becomes clear that Gökhan won't be able to talk to Ilker's acquaintance. However, later on, Gökhan takes out 500 liras from his pocket and places it on the table. Confused about what's happening, Ilker tries to lighten the mood by joking, "Me? But I've never even taken care of a bedridden person before." Then Gökhan says, "Just tell me, when did I tell you that my aunt is paralyzed?" Ilker doesn't understand why Gökhan asked this out of the blue, but he still prefers to answer. Ilker says that Gökhan mentioned it on September 25 at 3:30 p.m. when they were in the school's workshop room. You might ask, how is this possible? How can anyone easily remember such mundane knowledge without any difficulty? Well, it's because he has hyperthymesia, a very rare condition that enables people to recall nearly all past experiences in great detail. Doesn't Gökhan know that Ilker has hyperthymesia? Of course, he must know. I guess so, because they have known each other for months. He just needed to reconfirm it. Because he plans to utilize Ilker's skill in upcoming poker tournaments. He thought that by giving him money, they could become partners and earn some money to find a better caregiver. Does Gökhan genuinely believe he can sort out his financial problems solely through gambling? Or is he convinced that Ilker's condition will guarantee wins in the tournaments? I don't know, but he just seems really eager to give it a shot, I guess. Next, Ilker takes a deep breath, and tells Gökhan that he has no idea what he is talking about. Gökhan actually doesn't understand what he meant but decides to pretend he knows what he is talking about. Ilker opens up about his past, revealing that his father struggled with a gambling addiction, leading to their family's bankruptcy. He explains that they had to sell their house to cover his father's debts. This sheds light on why he was hesitant to give it a try, despite having a memory advantage over other players. After some hesitation, Gökhan slowly slides the money over to Ilker and says, "You'll play for me. If you lose, it's on me, but if you win, we'll split the profit. Deal?" Rather than refusing or accepting the offer, Ilker takes out a coin from his pocket and holds it, ready to flip for heads or tails. While Gökhan doesn't understand what's going on, Ilker asks him, "Heads or tails?" Gökhan says, "Heads," but then Ilker abruptly puts the coin back in his pocket. Gökhan says, "What the hell was that?" Ilker explains, "That's just how gambling works. Sometimes you think something will happen, but it won't. Ilka rubs his hands and says, "Excuse me," before he goes to wash his hands in cold water. But when he returns, Gokun is gone, but the 500 lira is still on the table. And here's where today's story ends. We will find out what Ilker will do next and how will their story progress. We will also learn about new characters. At the same time we will try to figure out how the school is run and what are the mysteries behind it. It will be a very long journey, spanning episodes and even seasons. Thanks for watching, bye until the next chapter. Meanwhile, a small tent in the campus forest is being tossed around by the wind. Inside, a short, petite girl named Ada, who is one-handed and wears a prosthetic, appears to be sleeping. Outside, the footsteps of a stranger begin to be heard, though the strong wind seems to suppress them. After walking for a while, the stranger approaches the tent. As he begins to unzip it slowly, a gunshot is heard. The man collapses to the ground, blood pouring from his chest. The person who pulled the trigger was none other than Ada. Still trembling with fear inside her tent, she remains frozen in place. And she can only find the strength to look around after she drops her gun. Ada comes out and looks at the man's face. She definitely doesn't know who this man is. She starts to panic and hits her head with her hands while trying to figure out what to do. And eventually, she starts to gaze towards the murky pond next to her, thinking to hide the body there. Oktay, who is the principal of the school and also a math teacher, is in his office. He is examining the exam results that he is about to hang on the notice board shortly. Saddened by the poor exam results and worried that he may no longer be able to be beneficial to the new generation, Oktay considers resigning, as he has done on previous occasions. His resignation letter is right next to the exam results. Another student named Doigu, who contrasts starkly with Ada in her tall and sturdy appearance, is seated across from Oktay's desk. Feeling the urgency to prevent her favorite teacher's resignation, she knows she must take action. Doigu decides to bring up the rumor circulating in the school about a teacher having an inappropriate relationship with a student. Understanding that Oktay's daughter is also a student at the school, Doigu believes this rumor may prompt him to reconsider his decision in order to protect his daughter. Oktay tries to dismiss the rumor, stating that there needs to be evidence for it. Doigu counters, mentioning that her stepbrother has witnesses. She implies that in order to gather evidence, Oktay must improve her stepbrother's math grades. Doigu slowly walks to the door and says, "So, in the end, your daughter also studies at the school. An extra pair of eyes is always helpful." Then she leaves. Later on, Oktay tears up his resignation letter. Additionally, he decides to raise his stepbrother's math grade. After that, Gokun walks through the school corridor and starts examining the grades posted on the notice board with excitement. However, Gokun's overall grades are very low. Knowing that he will lose his scholarship and free accommodation if he receives low grades in the final exams to be held in 2 months, Gokun has a nervous breakdown and punches the notice board, causing it to fall down. Gokun's hand bleeds as Oktay slowly approaches and tries to calm him down, saying, "Don't worry. It's not your fault. You can do better in the final exams." However, Gokun dismisses him by shouting, "Yeah, this is not my fault. This is your fault." Gokun tries to run away, but angered Oktay orders him to put the notice board back. Gokun returns, puts the board back, and then runs away. While Doigu's stepbrother Selçuk sits on one of the benches on campus, Doigu approaches him saying that, "You heard what Gokun did? He just clashed with Oktay. I've worked so hard to prevent him from resigning. And now, he is probably considering resigning again because of him." While Doigu isn't certain whether Oktay is considering resigning, given Oktay's emotional nature, she assumes that all her efforts have probably been in vain. Hearing this, Selçuk becomes even angrier than her, muttering, "Is this bastard in over his head again? Come on. You think it's time for a little visit to our guest? And, of course, mockingly implying beating him. Selçuk stands up and walks a few steps ahead, but Duygu stops him by grabbing his arm. She suggests they can find another way. Selçuk tries to argue with her, but Duygu doesn't respond. Instead, she notices a bug crawling on Selçuk's jacket and starts examining it in her hand. Changing the topic, she mentions, "You know, I heard a gunshot today. It was coming from the forest. Why don't you go check on Ada? Maybe something will come to my mind while you're there." After more arguing, Selçuk states that if she can't find a different way by the time he returns from the forest, he will make the visit himself. Then he leaves. Feeling stressed, Duygu's right hand starts shaking. While looking around, she sees Gökhan walking on campus. The bug starts to move in her shaking hand, and she begins to observe it closely. After a while, her right hand stops shaking, implying that she has formulated a plan. After placing the bug on the bench, she starts smirking and heads towards Gökhan's dorm. With so many open books on his desk, Gökhan seems determined to study harder than ever before after discovering his terrible grades. After a while, Gökhan returns to his room to resume studying. However, he struggles to focus. As he takes a deep breath, he flips through the pages of one of his books only to find a large bug nestled between them. Startled, he lets out a scream and attempts to quickly get up from his chair, but ends up falling and hitting his head on the desk shelf with a loud thud. Later on, it turns out that it's actually a plastic bug secretly placed by Duygu. But the real question is, why? Why did Duygu and Selçuk do this, and what are they trying to accomplish? To understand this, we need to delve into a bit more context. First of all, Duygu is also the student leader at the school. Because of this, she is paid by the school and is one of the three components of the school management. Of course, these are not the only advantages of being a student leader, but we can easily assume that she wouldn't want to lose these privileges. She has always had bad blood with Gökhan due to his impulsive and unpredictable nature. She even fears that his actions may cause the collapse of the school project in the long run, potentially leading to Duygu losing her status as a student leader. We do not know if Duygu is right about her concerns or if she is exaggerating. However, Duygu also considers Oktay's presence as principal a stabilizing factor. She really doesn't want him to resign because of Gökhan. For these reasons, she has decided that Gökhan had to go. Selçuk is in the same boat as Duygu. He runs his father's successful restaurant inside the campus. Surely, he couldn't have run the restaurant as successfully if it were established elsewhere. Most of the clients actually come from outside, drawn by the unique aspects of the school. Plus, thanks to the school's autonomy, they can even sell prohibited foods, making their restaurant even more unique than others. In summary, the collapse of the school project can only be the last thing Selçuk would want. The plastic bug she placed will signal to Gökhan that someone has access to his room. Gökhan will become obsessed with finding this person and decide to install a micro camera on his door, which is quite easy to obtain on campus. However, the use of these cameras in the school is forbidden, of course, which will lead to his expulsion. Some may argue that this is a flawed plan relying on too many assumptions. But keep in mind that Selçuk had given her very little time to come up with a plan to expel Gökhan from the school. Additionally, she has a strong aversion to violence, which is why she chose this approach. And now, let's get back to Gökhan. After the incident, he continuously rubs his head while holding a plastic bag filled with ice cubes to the back of his head. Later, in anger, he throws the bug into a corner and calls the dorm security. He tells them that someone has accessed his room and asks them to check the camera records of the last 3 hours. Despite noticing the odd tone of the staff's voice on the phone, Gökhan decides to conceal his feelings. After hanging up and changing his t-shirt, he takes a stroll indoors for a while. Then, while looking towards the electronic shop on campus from his window, he's unsure of what to do next. Feeling overwhelmed, he decides to leave his room to get some fresh air. Gökhan enters the school's electronic shop with a plastic bag containing ice cubes pressed against the back of his head. After asking about Yagmar's whereabouts, she tries to quickly emerge from under the stand, but like Gökhan, she ends up falling and hitting her head. She stands up, and Gökhan apologizes after handing the plastic bag to Yagmar. By the way, Yagmar is another student at the school who has a part-time job similar to Gökhan and Ilker. She is also the daughter of Oktay, the school's principal. She replies to Gökhan by saying, "Don't worry. It's just a table, you know." Then she puts the plastic bag on the table where her head was hit. Not being in the mood, Gökhan fails to catch Yagmar's dry humor and states that he needs to buy a micro camera. Yagmar asks him the reason, and Gökhan starts telling the story after pulling the plastic bug out of his pocket and squeezing it with his index finger. After hearing the story, Yagmar tries to warn him about the danger of using it in the school, stating that he could be permanently expelled due to the school's rules. Rather than replying, Gökhan turns his head back and looks at one of the school's security cameras. Then, he points at the camera with his thumb and says, "Then what is this? A dummy camera?" While not expecting the question, she decides to answer somewhat unexpectedly by saying, "How do you know it's not?" Gökhan replies, "Are you serious?" Yagmar shrugs her shoulders first, indicating that she doesn't know either, and then extends her open hands towards Gökhan. One hand is empty, while there is a micro camera in her other hand, implying, "Are you buying or not?" After leaving the shop, he sits on a bench on the campus. Gökhan continuously turns his lighter on and off for a minute out of boredom. As he looks at the bandage on his hand, lost in thought, he notices that one of the school's security cameras is aimed at him. Before we begin, I want to remind you that this is going to be one of the most complicated parts. However, it will also be one of the most comforting, as it marks the conclusion of all major character introductions for Season 1. There won't be any new major plotline outside of the existing storylines. Now, let's get back to Gökhan. After a while, a yellow old car passes in front of Gökhan and parks next to the dorm. The front doors of the car open simultaneously, and two people get out at the same time. Ada exits from the right side, and from the left emerges none other than Baris, another student who is blonde, blue-eyed, and slightly chubby. As they head towards a shop called Beresistan, Gökhan opens his cigarette pack, only to realize that he has run out of cigarettes. Gökhan stands up and goes there to buy cigarettes. Ada, sitting on Baris's lap behind the counter, kisses him for a while. Gökhan enters slowly. Ada notices Gökhan and quickly stands up, letting out a sudden scream. She is horrified to see the shirt of the man she killed on Gökhan as well, and freezes for a moment. Gökhan and Baris, puzzled by Ada's behavior, look at her strangely. Baris stands up and hugs Ada, saying, "Hey, what's going on, beauty? Don't you recognize him?" However, without offering any explanation, Ada quickly leaves the shop. Baris asks Gökhan what's going on, and Gökhan responds that he has no idea. Unsatisfied with Gökhan's answer, Baris suddenly slams his hands on the table and speaks with a more serious tone. "Now, tell me what you did to her." Gökhan starts to panic, saying he doesn't know anything and doesn't understand what's happening. After a while, Baris interrupts Gökhan, saying he was just kidding. Then, Baris adds that he doesn't understand why Ada left like that either. He says, "I don't know, man. She probably got high again with something she took from here." After hearing that, Gökhan begins to examine the shop where various types of drugs are sold. After leaving Beresistan, Gökhan begins to feel more clueless, unsure, and frightened than ever before. Despite his best efforts, Ilker hasn't responded to his offer yet. Later, he learns of his terrible exam results, which endanger his scholarship, and then he discovers that someone has access to his room. Feeling stretched thin and uncertain about how to deal with these issues simultaneously, he decides to talk with the school's manager to address the second issue. The school manager and Turkish literature teacher Kagla, chat on Messenger while watching the school's camera recordings in her office. Gokun complains, saying, "I heard that there were courses last year. Why aren't there any now?" Kagla replies, "And I heard you weren't here last year. So why are you here now?" And then she casually snorts cocaine. After hearing this awkward response, he becomes convinced that the courses aren't going to be reopened. He responds, "I don't know. Maybe you needed someone who could question why the courses no longer exist." As Gokun immediately regrets his rushed and bold response, Kagla begins to feel amused and says, "Seriously? You don't strike me as that kind of guy at all." Quickly turning her laptop toward Gokun, she shows him footage of himself sitting alone on a bench, staring directly at the camera. Pointing at his image on the screen, she continues, "You seem more like someone who doesn't want this place to turn into another stupid prison like high school, right?" Kagla presents Gokun with a signature campaign aimed at completing the removal process of security cameras in the school. Feeling shocked by Kagla's unbelievable hypocrisy, Gokun starts reading the campaign and states that he can only sign if the courses will be opened. After a moment of silence, Kagla explains that bringing back courses isn't easy. She then makes another offer, suggesting that if he considers working with Baris, the courses might be reopened. Additionally, she says he's going to make a lot of money by working with Baris at Berazistan. Because Kagla believes that the public and some students question drug legalization in the school too much, she assumes that finding a business partner for Baris will significantly normalize drug use in the public eye. After a moment of silence, Gokun asks if it's the final offer. Kagla extends her hand, hoping to shake hands with Gokun. However, Gokun refuses because he wants nothing to do with drugs. He heads to Yagmar's electronic shop with hopes of making more money by working there. Additionally, he entertains the idea that getting close to Yagmar might enable him to convince Oktay to reopen the courses in the near future. However, his hopes are dashed when Yagmar informs him that there is already a candidate waiting to work there. After the frustration, Gokun becomes even more obsessed with the courses than ever before, making them his top priority now. Consequently, he decides to speak with the school's philosophy teacher about it. By the way, this is the same guy about whom there's a rumor circulating in the school that he's having an affair with one of his students, as Doigu mentioned previously. After dealing with Erdem's talkative nature in his abstract conversations, he discovers that Erdem knows some excellent teachers from other high schools who could offer tutoring at their school. However, much like Kagla, he's not going to provide it to Gokun for free. Erdem says, "If you want tutoring, give me the student numbers." While Gokun doesn't understand why Erdem wants the numbers, he prefers to ask, "How can I get the numbers?" Erdem replies, "Can I take that as a yes?" and adds, "I know, you know. But the question is, why? Why does Erdem want to learn the student numbers?" To understand this, we need a bit more context. First of all, the school keeps the owners of student numbers confidential for privacy reasons. However, grades are always posted on the board with student numbers so that students can compare their grades with others. So, everybody knows which number corresponds to which grades. What they don't know is the names associated with those numbers. Erdem, who also organizes poker tournaments at the school, believes that this school project is basically doomed to collapse. He wants to seize this unique opportunity and take advantage of the special benefits of the tournaments until the project collapses. To delay the collapse of the project, Erdem resorts to an interesting method. He aims to keep the school management on edge by engaging in behavior that could jeopardize the project. He thinks that this way, they will work harder to protect the project, thus delaying its inevitable collapse. That's why he was asking Gokun for student numbers. Anyway, let's get back to Gokun. After thinking about Erdem's reply, "I know, you know," Gokun recalls that a few days ago, while he, Ilker, and Erdem were conversing with Oktay in his room, Ilker stumbled upon a list of students' names paired with numbers for a few minutes. And Oktay had immediately removed the list from sight. Considering Ilker's extraordinary memory condition, Erdem was most likely referring to this incident. Which means Gokun can easily ask Ilker for the numbers. And here's where the most complicated part concludes. After engaging in some small talk with Ilker, Gokun extends a pencil and paper to him, then asks if he still remembers the student numbers. Ilker confirms that he does, but expresses reluctance to provide them due to potential danger. Gokun tries to reassure him, saying it's not dangerous at all. In the worst-case scenario, they might impose only a very light penalty if they find out. Despite Gokun's attempts to ease Ilker's concerns, his persistent timid attitude remains unchanged, prompting Gokun to reconsider his approach. As the conversation progresses, Ilker unexpectedly states that his reluctance stems from caution rather than fear. Hearing this, Gokun senses that this might be Ilker's weak spot. Summoning his courage, Gokun implies that only a coward would be too afraid to risk such a light penalty. Upon hearing this, Ilker freezes for a moment before asking, "Do you want to know who got the highest grades in math?" Not expecting to trigger Ilker so easily, Gokun immediately feels pleased with his small victory and responds, "Of course." Ilker names Doigu, but Gokun is immediately puzzled by this answer and begins questioning how it could have happened. As he begins to look around cluelessly, his gaze lands on the window of the principal's office where he sees Oktai and Doigu standing too close to each other. Aware of the rumor circulating in the school about a teacher having an affair with a student, Gokun assumes that Oktai must be involved, and that's how Doigu managed to achieve the highest grade. With this realization, he quickly leaves, believing that the tide has now turned in his favor. Running through the school corridors, Gokun notices the closed door of the principal's office and comes to a halt. He cautiously approaches the door, glancing around to ensure no one spots him. Hoping to catch Doigu and Oktai off guard and prove their affair, Gokun quickly swings the door wide open. However, it collides with the table's aquarium, sending it crashing to the ground, with a goldfish inside. Panicking, Doigu jumps up, shouting at Gokun, and swiftly grabs a pencil case to rescue the fish before hurrying out of the room. Ada is engrossed in her phone while gazing out of the open window in the hallway adjacent to the workshop room. Meanwhile, Gokun, inside the workshop, examines his reflection in the mirror. Suddenly, after being informed of the recent incident by Doigu, Selchuk storms into the workshop and punches Gokun, causing him to collide with the mirror and collapse onto the floor. Startled by the fight, Ada accidentally drops her phone out of the window, shattering it into pieces. She approaches the closed door of the workshop and begins listening intently to the escalating fight. While Gokun is walking alone in the school hallway, Erdem notices the bruises and band-aids on Gokun's face and rushes up to him, asking for an explanation. Gokun half-jokingly says, "Nothing, I just crashed into a door." Erdem assumes that Gokun is lying and insists on learning the truth, but Gokun repeats, "Just as I said, I just crashed into a door." Gokun steps into the elevator, and as the doors close, he catches sight of Doigu and Selchuk arguing at the other end of the hallway. While Oktai is mopping the floors in his room, Erdem sits across from him. Erdem assumes that whoever made this is now in big trouble, but Oktai quickly clarifies that he doesn't know who did it either. Puzzled by Oktai's answer, Erdem demands more details. Oktai explains, "Doigu was there last time, but she didn't say anything to me either." Erdem responds, "How many more incidents like this need to happen before Kagla realizes that her silly liberal policies don't work? How can someone attempt to harm your cute little fish?" Oktai corrects him, saying, "Alex. His name is Alex." Erdem remarks, "She might want to remove the cameras, but thankfully, there are other ways we can get the ministry's attention here." First Erdem, then Oktai, look out the window at the campus forest. Erdem observes, the lives of endemic creatures in the forest are now at the mercy of the students. I bet some of the students will harm them because of their sloppiness. Among themselves. With some rules. Maybe they can prevent others from snitching. But what can they do if similar situations continue to happen in the forest and begin to attract the attention of the ministry? Erdem quickly puts 2 and 2 together and realizes that there's probably a no-snitching rule among students because neither Gokun nor Doigu had explained anything to them. Meanwhile, Gokun struggles to focus on studying in his room. But despite his efforts, he finds himself unable to concentrate, resulting in him angrily tossing his book aside. Later, frustration mounting, he swept everything off his desk in a fit of rage, save for the plastic bug. Continuously crushing the plastic bug with his middle finger, he shifts his obsession from exams to his security issue. Eventually, he grabs a piece of paper listing student names and numbers, and attempts to identify who might have access to his room. Though he knows he has bad blood with Doigu and Selçuk, he remains uncertain as to who is responsible. He starts to think that someone as brutish as Selçuk must have nothing to do with this. And it makes Doigu the only suspect in the eyes of Gokun. However, lacking concrete evidence, he thinks he still needs evidence. Soon after, Yagmur calls Gokun and informs him that there is no candidate waiting to work here anymore. If he still wants to, he can work in the shop now. While Yagmur is assembling an electronic device at the electronics shop, Gokun is crushing a plastic bug on the table with his index finger, pondering how he can prove that Doigu has access to his room. Yagmur jokingly remarks, "Seems like you're working very hard from day one." Upon hearing this, Gokun attempts to change the subject by saying, "Don't you think the prices here are a bit too low?" After a while, Ada arrives at the shop with her broken phone. Instead of letting Ada explain herself, Yagmur immediately states, "It's not covered by the warranty, you know." Ada replies with a simple, "Yes," to which Yagmur adds, "Sorry, I didn't mean to ask such a stupid question to someone like you." Yagmur glances at Ada's prosthetic hand for a moment before returning her gaze to Ada's face. As she notices how offended Ada looks, Yagmur starts to panic. Ada responds sharply, "What do you mean? A stupid question to someone like me? Do you even realize what you're implying?" Yagmur, taken aback by Ada's reaction, struggles to understand why she seems so offended. Ada then explains, her tone tinged with frustration, "It's perfectly normal for someone like me, a stupid, poor, disabled, to drop and break things all the time. So, I should know better than anyone that it's not covered by the warranty, right?" Feeling remorseful, Yagmur attempts to placate her, saying, "I didn't mean it like that." But Ada, still angered, flings her phone onto the counter and swiftly departs from the store, leaving Yagmur with a sinking feeling of regret. Filled with extreme rage, sadness, and self-pity, Ada sits on a bench on campus next to Selçuk. With a casual tone, she asks, "How are you today?" Selçuk, aware of their lack of history, is puzzled by her strange approach and attempts to brush off her small talk with rudeness. Ada, undeterred, gestures towards Yagmur's electronic shop and suggests that Selçuk should buy her a new phone. She makes it clear that if he refuses, she will expose the fact that he had beaten up Gokun. In a somewhat jesting manner, Ada even implies that he could resort to stealing a phone if he desires. Gokun quietly enters an empty classroom and carefully places the plastic bug between the pages of Doigu's book. Satisfied with his placement, he leaves the room and positions himself at a safe distance in the hallway. Observing Gokun's presence from afar, Doigu hesitates before entering the classroom, closing the door behind her. Inside, Gokun presses his ear against the door, eager to hear her reaction. As per his plan, if Doigu remains unfazed, it will confirm her as the one who had entered his room, having previously encountered the plastic bug. Taking her seat at the desk, Doigu opens her book, only to freeze momentarily upon spotting the plastic bug. Realizing it is Gokun's attempt to test her, she feigns a scream in an effort to deceive him. However, Gokun discerns the fakeness in her scream and realizes that it is indeed Doigu. After a brief pause, Doigu abruptly swings the classroom door open, but to her dismay, finds no sign of Gokun in the hallway. After remembering purchasing a micro camera and Yagmur's warnings, Gokun puts 2 and 2 together and realizes how close he was to getting expelled from school. After realizing her plan has failed and Gokun now knows everything, she decides to talk to his stepbrother to figure out their next steps. Selçuk immediately starts the conversation by stating how stupid her plan was. Duygu objects, reminding him that because he has given her very little time, and beating up Gökhan has only made things worse. Selçuk tries to argue by stating that he was just protecting her and his business. Duygu's right hand begins to shake, and then she states in a fearful tone that Gökhan will seek revenge very soon. Selçuk thinks she is exaggerating, but she makes it clear that she rather fears an impulsive retaliation. Duygu thinks they need to keep an eye on him at least for a while, to which Selçuk agrees. He phones his guys and wants to learn his whereabouts. Meanwhile, Selçuk and Duygu go to Selçuk's restaurant to guard it. As night falls on the campus, Duygu and Selçuk are in the restaurant while Selçuk's guys are still trying to find out about Gökhan's whereabouts. Batu informs Selçuk that he even tried knocking on his dorm room every few hours, but he didn't open the door, implying that he possibly isn't in his dorm room. While Gökhan is in İlker's dorm room, he learns that İlker is still reluctant to play in the tournaments. Later on, he gives the student numbers to Erdem on the phone as they had agreed previously. Then he informs Yagmur that due to some unexpected developments, he might not show up in the electronics shop for a while. Yagmur says it's not a problem at all, and Gökhan reminds her about his plan to increase the prices in the shop. By the way, keep in mind that almost everything in the school is sold way cheaper than standard market prices. It's another aspect of the school that will be addressed in other episodes. Considering other potential customers outside of the school, Gökhan's suggestion makes sense. But then she also reminds him that it's against the school policies. After thinking for a while, Gökhan says, "What about announcing that there might be a price increase in the near future? In this way, we can maybe sell more stuff." Impressed with his advice, she agrees. And after hanging up, he starts planning what he should do next, and here is where the day ends. The next day, as Kagla walks down the school corridor, she notices that it's filled with Erdem's tutoring announcements. After pausing for a moment, she approaches one of them and starts reading. She notices that Erdem offers discounts to students who received low grades on the midterm exams. Seeing their numbers disclosed and student information leaked, she breaks down and begins tearing down the announcement. Filled with rage, she continues tearing down the other tutoring announcements. Seeing her, Erdem comes next to Kagla and tries to calm her down. But he fails, and she even tries to assault him, blaming him for the leak. 1 hour later, they meet again. Erdem thinks that Kagla will demand a clear explanation, but Kagla says, "I hope you don't have a satisfactory explanation for now. Because I am late for my meeting." While Erdem is puzzled by this weird and unexpected answer, he assumes that she is joking. While Kagla's finger is on one of the announcements, Erdem says, "Someone must have added the student numbers while they were in print. That's nothing to do with me." Kagla replies, "Student numbers? What student numbers?" Then, slowly lifting her finger off the announcement, she starts pointing to Erdem and says, "I was talking about this filth." Puzzled, Erdem replies, "Pardon," then realizes Kagla is probably high on some drugs. Suddenly, Kagla pulls her finger back and says, "I'm so sorry, I didn't mean it like that. I mean the dust, not you." Erdem feels both relieved and insulted for the first time in his life. But then Kagla says she wishes him success in the council, implying that he will be punished for his activity. Several hours later, while walking on campus, İlker receives a call from an unknown number. The caller, a secret blackmailer, asks him to send 100 liras every week. If he fails to comply, the blackmailer threatens to expose İlker's involvement in leaking student ID numbers. While İlker is shocked and horrified, he has no idea why anyone would want to blackmail him for such a ridiculously small amount of money. He low-key suspects Gökhan but can't understand why he would want to do that, and the worst part is he's not even sure whether it's wiser to report this incident or not. Because he's already paid more than that, and if he is expelled from the school because of the leak, he will lose everything, including his free accommodation. As the school corridors are filled with tutoring announcements, the electronic shop's windows are also filled with announcements that prices might be increased in the near future. Yagmur updates her website as well and thinks this might encourage people to buy stuff as soon as possible. Then Selçuk arrives and asks Yagmur where Gökhan is. Yagmur claims that she doesn't know. Selçuk asks her about the announcements, and Yagmur confesses that it was Gökhan's idea. Upon hearing that, Selçuk leaves the shop. Selçuk calls Kagla to inform her, hoping that this incident may result in Gökhan's expulsion from the school. But what Selçuk doesn't know is that Kagla has other plans. After her offers were rejected by Gökhan, she becomes even more obsessed with convincing him to work with Barys. She plans to have some phones taken from the electronics shop and placed in Gökhan's room to frame him. Thus, Gökhan, who will be accused of theft, will have to work with Barys to pay the compensation. Kagla says, "I have something to do with you tonight," before ending the call. As night descends on the campus, Gökhan and İlker find themselves embroiled in a heated argument over the blackmail issue. Gökhan highlights the absurdity of the situation, while İlker repeatedly questions whether Gökhan revealed his name to Erdem. Gökhan insists that he never mentioned İlker's name to Erdem. Despite hours of debate, they reach no conclusion. İlker subtly suggests that Gökhan could be the blackmailer. It means that even this suspicion might prompt İlker to kick Gökhan out of the dorm room. Gökhan senses the danger and thus tries to choose his words very carefully. Afterward, İlker claims that he knows how to find the blackmailer. However, suddenly, the electricity across the entire campus goes out. Feeling stressed and unsure of what to do next, Gökhan agrees to listen to İlker's plan but insists on stepping outside for some fresh air first. He leaves without considering the possibility that his abrupt departure might only heighten İlker's suspicions even further. After the campus experiences an electricity outage, Selçuk arrives at the door of the electronics shop with a black mask on his face, just as planned. He discreetly picks the lock and enters the shop. Once inside, he removes his mask and carefully draws the curtains closed. Then, he begins to place the phones he finds into his bag. While scanning the shelves, Selçuk notices other phones and electronic items, prompting him to grab the store's chair. He positions the chair against the bottom of the shelves and climbs onto it. As he reaches for items, Selçuk starts to feel his balance waver. Desperately, he clings to the shelves, but this action results in both him and the shelves tumbling down, creating a big chaos in the area. Gökhan strolls down the dim hallway of the dorm until he reaches a window overlooking the school's flag fluttering in the square. He retrieves a pack of cigarettes from his pocket and lights one. Just then, the electricity is restored across the campus. After slowly looking down, Gökhan suddenly locks eyes with Duygu, and they both freeze for a moment. Remembering the near-death experience in his dorm room because of her and the beatings he endured because of her brother, he is filled with rage and an uncontrollable desire to confront her. Sitting on the windowsill, he gazes at Barys's classic car parked next to the dormitory, preparing to jump down. Suddenly, Gökhan leaps down and flicks his cigarette towards the trash can beside the car. The car's roof buckles under Gökhan's weight as his cigarette ignites the trash. With a swift movement, he jumps from the car's roof to the ground and begins to chase after Duygu. After receiving a phone call informing her that her shop may have been plundered, Yagmur rushes around campus and arrives at her shop. Upon seeing the devastation, she experiences a nervous breakdown. Yagmur realizes that the phones have been stolen and she already knows who is to blame. In Yagmur's view, it was nothing more than an attempt at revenge by Ada, who was overly sensitive about her prosthetic hand and in need of a phone. As Gökhan continues chasing her, Duygu delves deeper into the forest, following the path. Meanwhile, Gökhan finds himself at the entrance of the campus forest, with the distance between them growing. Realizing he can only catch Duygu by taking a shortcut, because of this, Gökhan enters the forest from a different point. Gökhan suddenly finds himself deep in the forest and begins running, disregarding the slope, and pays a heavy price by falling brutally. His white t-shirt is soon covered in mud, but he quickly gets up and continues running despite the branches cutting and scratching his arms and face. Suddenly, silence reigns over the forest. As he looks around, Gokun starts to notice his injuries. In the distance, he spots a beam of purple light and decides to follow it. Gokun emerges in a mushroom field within the forest, where a lo-fi tune plays softly in the background. Small, colorful lights are arranged around the vibrant mushrooms. The street lamps on the other side of the path cast a purple hue over the pond and the surrounding area. Enchanted by the scene, Gokun begins to explore the garden. Realizing he has trespassed by not using the forest path and was caught on the school's security camera, Gokun devises a plan to cover his tracks. He plans to create a small fire, then extinguish it, and claim to the council that he had to rush into the forest because there was a fire he needed to put out. He hastily gathers some pieces of wood and places them near the path. Then, he picks up a half-empty bottle lying on the ground and ignites a fire with the lighter in his pocket. Panicking, he pretends to be in a rush during the phone call he makes. After calling the fire department, and thinking he can use the conversation as evidence, Gokun hangs up the phone. Meanwhile, the fire has started to grow. Gokun hastily pours the water from the bottle onto the fire, but fails to extinguish it. As the fire spreads, he starts to panic for real this time. He tries to fill the bottle in the pond. However, as it fills up very slowly, he gets angry and throws the bottle into a corner. While wandering around anxiously, he notices a metal bucket across the pond. Meanwhile, Yagmur also runs in the forest to confront Ada. Then Yagmur stops when she sees Ada's tent. Ada comes out of her tent with a latest model phone she got from Selçuk as they had agreed previously. Yagmur angrily accuses her for stealing phones and ruining her shop. Scared Ada doesn't know what Selçuk did, therefore she can't understand what Yagmur is talking about. Yagmur starts to come closer to Ada while angrily demands her phone back. As Ada becomes more horrified and scared, she suddenly notices a smoke rising behind Yagmur. Ada points it out and mentions that there's a fire, but Yagmur believes that Ada is just bluffing. And then panicked Ada starts to convince her to stop claiming there are secret traps in here. Yagmur finds it an even more ridiculous lie than the smoke, then she runs towards Ada. She falls into a hidden pit and screams in pain. After shocking, Ada looks at her with sadness and helplessness for a while, but then runs towards the source of the smoke. The supposedly controlled fire Gokun made continues to spread thanks to his foresight and the wind. Ada arrives, hides behind a tree, and begins to watch Gokun secretly. Then, she starts to worry about her mushrooms. Meanwhile, Ilker calls Gokun to remind him that they were supposed to discuss the plan to catch the blackmailer. Gokun attempts to grab the metal bucket but accidentally trips, causing it to fall into the murky pond. He quickly takes off his shirt, and just as he prepares to jump into the murky water, the phone in his pocket starts ringing. As he dives deeper, Gokun begins to see the body of the man Ada killed. And here's where the first episode ends.